we couldn't. Newton we inherited the Newton project. They were one of the 428 communities that had schools in the pipeline, that had prior approval from the Department of Education to build what they wanted to build. All we could enforce was our share of the cost. So we did enforce that. And we
How did you do that?
Well, we just locked in what our cost is. Our percentage is
by stopping the dollar.
we figured out what our maximum allowable cost would be with every school. In Newton's case, at the time, it was $46 million. That was the maximum allowable cost on our share. At that time, that was about a 46% reimbursement, because their school was at $104 million at that time. So, so we locked that in. We thought that that might be enough to drive the cost down, but it wasn't. The school was unwilling to compromise and work with us, as Norwood has and as Wellesley has, and as others did. And so we could not enforce any other restrictions on them.
So what went wrong with that project?
The types of things that I'm talking about, the special parts. First of all, the size of the school we think is bigger than it needs to be, square footage. I don't know if the proper work was done on the siting the school. Obviously, they did test, but those tests didn't uncover rock, which most people said we knew there was rock there, and it didn't uncover asbestos that a lot of people seemed to know, but it didn't be uncovered. So site work needed to be done that wasn't done, that drove the cost up. Size of the school was extravagant, and there are facets to that school, and I'm not aware of all of them because we weren't involved in the process, to be honest with you, but there are facets to that school, like an indoor pool, a very large gymnasium, and batting cages in the school, and a balcony on the auditorium that we didn't feel was necessary, but they thought was important, that is structurally very expensive to do, size of the auditorium, which we thought was very high. So all those things, and those are just the ones I know of. I was told there were indoor tennis courts, but I'm not aware that that's not the case. So, and a design that is on its merits very expensive. It's a zigzag design with curves, and anytime you add those types of elements in any kind of a building project, they are more expensive to actually build. So those are the things that drove the cost of the school up, and I would be surprised if that school actually comes in at $197 million when it's all said and done.
Why is that?
I just think it will my best guess is that it will come in higher.
Because
of all the things I talked to you about, and because of I think the city still doesn't have total control of the architects and the builders that they would probably need and that we would be able to provide. And again, this process in the new world that we live in, we don't stop working with communities once we give them approval. That's really, we are into this process from the beginning all the way till the building is completely open. We have a progress payment plan in place that is different from what was in the past. We are structured now that we can reimburse communities 30 days after bills are submitted as projects are being built, which also allows us to get to be part of the process when change orders are put in place, and as the building is being done, we can audit that building as it's being built. It also gives communities money right away, so they don't have to borrow as much early as they would have in the past. The old way, they have to borrow the whole amount and then wait for us to reimburse after it's completed. And that's why a lot of these things weren't caught early enough, because the state didn't get involved until after the school was completed, once they had given approval. So we're into it from the early, before it's built, once it's signed off, and then we will monitor the building as it's being built and work with communities to try to stave off some of these unexpected, unintended consequences.
With Newton, it was supposed to be a renovation originally, and then it got, the mayor requested that it become, that they built a new school instead. Do you know how that happened while
that was
under the treasurer's office?
No, that was done by, that permission was given to them by David Driscoll in a letter that they presented to us. They did everything legally to get what they wanted. Because if they didn't, we wouldn't have allowed them to. But they had a letter from David Driscoll I believe it was signed just before the moratorium went into place, saying that they would be allowed, if they saw that the need was to build new, they would be allowed to change the scope of their project from a renovation to a new school, which they chose to do, but they had the right to do that under the statute that we, you know, that we inherited. So anything that was given by right by the DOE, and a maximum allowable cost that was determined by the DOE, we were responsible for it, and we lived up to every one of those commitments. Some of them we agreed with, some we didn't, but we lived up to them, and that's again why we couldn't turn around and force Newton to do something different.
Did you agree with that one?
I don't know, to be honest with you, I never got that opportunity, but I will tell you that building high schools, renovating high schools is a challenge, and we're not blind to that challenge, because there's usually no place to put the kids while you're renovating, and it does generally add to the length of the project if it has to be phased in. That's why we're looking at the model school program, because we realize that renovation is not going to be the only answer. And in high schools, it will probably be, you know, educationally, we have to consider the educational disruptions. And if it's going to take an extra 2 years to phase it in, those are going to drive up costs. Inflation costs will be greater. So we would rather just spend all of the money on the school and not to the banks and not to the inflation and not to builders and architects. So we think that going forward, so we may very well decided, as Newton did, that new school made sense in the end. Because I know one of the problems for them is they were going to bus the kids out of the city, and that is generally not an option that is politically viable or reasonable in my mind. So, and that's one of the driving forces with Wellesley, is they want a new school. Norwood wants a new school, because renovating that school, because there's so much to renovate, it will disrupt all of the students from virtually all of the period of time. And if we can find some kind of a solution that allows them to build a new school, there will still be disruptions, because they'll be building it on site in both cases, but I think we can minimize, we all believe that we can minimize those educational disruptions and still give them a new school.
I think there are people, and others should interrupt so I don't monopolize the whole conversation here, but there are people in Wellesley who might feel that they've been punished because of Newton's mistakes, that they're, you know, overly harsh perhaps on them and what they wanted to do. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think they will benefit from Newton's mistakes, in my mind. The taxpayers as well as the students that will be in the school. I firmly believe that that Newton was and is an outlier, and I don't think it's going to cost us, and should cost $150 to $200 million to build new schools. It may eventually, over time, but I think we can do it less expensively, and it won't be, I will argue very strenuously, this will ever be seen as a punishment, that they'll get as good a school as they would have gotten for a lot less money, a lot less cost to the taxpayers. And I think Newton's being punished because at the same time they're building a $200 million high school, they are forced to lay off public employees, including teachers, because the 2.5 override did not pass.